I will record today's class since we have half of them out at track, and we're wrapping up the Cold War today, which is going to be very important for you to know on this test. So, this is what you need to know for the test on Friday. Friday will be your final exam for AP, and there will be 80 questions that are multiple choice. So you don't necessarily have to remember every single name or phrase or whatever, but you do need to be able to recognize it. And this will really kind of help prepare you for what you need to know later for the AP test. So there's 80 questions. In addition to that, there is a 5-paragraph essay. Now, y'all remember, a 5-paragraph essay is actually pretty easy. Because, let's review that real quick. How many points are you going to use to prove your thesis? 3. So our opening paragraph has what in it? A thesis and your 3 points, telling me what each of the other 3 paragraphs are going to be about. What's your closing paragraph got? It repeats the thesis and your 3 points. First paragraph and the last paragraph, they're the same. You might reword them, but they're the same. There's nothing special about them. They give you your thesis, they give you your outline. The middle 3 paragraphs are where you prove whatever your thesis is. So, the 5-paragraph essay is going to ask you a question about something that we've covered fairly recently. So it'll be kind of fresh in your mind. So it'll be something we've covered since we got back from spring break. So the stuff we're learning now about the Cold War, the stuff we learned about the World Wars, really basically the 20th century stuff. It'll come from somewhere in there. So especially know the 20th century stuff well. If you know that stuff well enough that you could answer a question and throw out some names and some events to prove some thesis, that's the main thing you're going to need to dig out of your memory. Okay? So any questions about that? All right, so make sure you remember how to do a 5-paragraph essay. You'll write a thesis, you'll give 3 reasons why that thesis is true, and then 3 paragraphs giving your facts from what you've learned, and it'll be something from World War I up through the end of the Cold War. By the way, the test ends with the Cold War and the events that are going on in the Middle East, which we'll cover next class. So really, basically the test ends around 1995. The modern stuff we'll cover next week after we've taken the final. Then we'll cover the other stuff to get you up to the present day and practice our essays to have you ready for the AP test. Okay, so this is videoed, so all you folks out there don't have to bug everyone in here for their notes. Here is what we're covering today. So, what was the last thing we covered in the Cold War? How is it going by the late 1960s? Okay, the Vietnam War is going on. So, if you were to say in 1967, who is winning the Cold War, who would you say?
America.
Why America?
Because all the Russians, or the Soviets, sent their boats back.
True. The Cuban Missile Crisis had been kind of a win for the U.S., at least on the stage of public opinion. What about in other areas of the world? Okay, communism is spreading to Vietnam. North Vietnam is trying to spread it into South Vietnam. So by 1967, most Americans think we will eventually prevail there, but is that a guarantee? Is it clear at 1967 that this thing is almost over? No, it's really not. At least it shouldn't be. Some people may have it in their mind that it's that way, but that's where we're picking up with 1968, and I believe that's where we left off. So what is the Tet Offensive? Okay. Yes, Tet. There's the word right there. Tet Offensive. All right. So here's how things were going. As of 1968, before the Tet Offensive, why were they telling us we were winning the war? What was our way of keeping score?
Body
Body counts. They're telling us we're killing more communists. We're killing them off. We're going to prevail and eradicate the communists from South Vietnam. The idea is we're fighting the Vietnam War to try to get the result we got in Korea, a stalemate. We're trying to create what we would call a free South Vietnam and leave North Vietnam under communist control and create that stalemate. But in 1968, as much as the American people are told that the war is nearly over, like I do believe we talked about last time, the images that we were getting on television, we're seeing the horrors of war. Our young people who are graduating high school and being drafted and sent off to war are starting to protest, many of them, and question the war and question the morality of this war. And in the midst of all that, as people start to question it, in 1968, suddenly the whole map blows up in one day. See, we're told that this whole region down here, well, there's some fighting along the border and some fighting way back here in the back country, but the cities are secure. We're winning the war. We're crushing the Viet Cong. But what they did, Tet was the beginning of their new year. That was the name of their year. You know how, like in China, they have the year of the dog or the year of the monkey or whatever it might be. Well, in Vietnam, they named their years, and this one is called Tet. And the New Year's celebration, which happens a number of weeks after our own New Year's, this is going to be a day that people generally stop fighting for a few days. They go home, they see their families. It's a big celebration. This is their big celebration. And what they expect is from the countryside, farmers will come into town with their little baskets full of food, and they'll share them with their families in town, and they'll have large celebrations. So in the days leading up to Tet, crowds are coming to the cities. And those crowds include little farmers with their baskets of food and little farmers with their baskets of guns, ammo, and grenades, because they are the Viet Cong, because they are blending in and they are sneaking into the cities. And what ends up happening on New Year's Day is suddenly every one of these cities along from north to south, all the way down to the capital in Saigon, suddenly erupts in violence as the Viet Cong attack everywhere across the map. And if you turned on the nightly news that night and you looked at this map with all those little explosions all over it, you go, what happened? The government said this thing was over with, and look at it. We're attacked everywhere. Down in Saigon, the Viet Cong overran the American embassy, and we had to send in Marines to drive them out. The whole thing blew up in our face in one day. And Americans kind of got slapped in the face that day and realized, we ain't close to winning this thing. It's nowhere near over. So from this point on, a lot of Americans, the ones that had been behind the war effort, that felt like it was the right thing to do to stop the spread of communism, are starting to think we can't win in Vietnam. This is not going to come out a success. We've got to pull out. We've got to find a way out. And so many Americans are starting to, as we approach the 1968 election, they're looking for a president who's going to get us out of this ugly war, end the war, hopefully end it with a stable South Vietnam, but get U.S. troops out of there. Well, who is the president up until this time running the Vietnam War? You better all know, because you're from his state. Johnson. LBJ, a Texan. He has been president. But after the Tet Offensive, he makes an announcement early in 1968 that he will not seek nor accept the Democratic Party's nomination for another term of office as president. So the Democratic presidential incumbent is stepping aside. His presidency has been ruined by the Vietnam War, and he knows it. The Democrats are going to struggle to find another man to be their standard bearer. Eventually, the guy that summer that looks like he's going to win is a Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. If you remember the little political button I have over there for 1968, Anna, read the little black button that has Robert Kennedy's face in 1968. What's it say on it? We mourn our loss. Why is that a campaign slogan?
Because, well, Kennedy got
Because he gets assassinated.
Then that's what happens to Robert.
Yeah, that's what happened to Robert. That's his mourning button. In the summer of 1968, Robert Kennedy is on his way to winning the Democratic National nomination. And there's a good chance he could win because he's young, he's energetic, he reflects back to his brother, he's hopeful. A lot of people are kind of buying into him. And then he gets assassinated. Anyone know why they assassinated Robert Kennedy? It does seem to run in the Kennedy, yes.
I read it, but I don't remember. All I know is he went to the bottom of the hotel, and I guess someone that had a disagreement with him.
Yes. So what ends up happening is it's not about communism. It's not about Cuba. It's not about the mafia or any of the other things tied to Kennedy's assassination, President Kennedy's assassination. He's assassinated because as a senator, he supported Israel. It's a Palestinian that kills him. And we're going to talk more about this next class. Over in the Middle East, since World War II, there's been this growing division between the Arab states, who had been promised their own lands, promised their freedom, their own nations, and the Jews, who had been given a nation state in the midst of all that in Palestine. And so this war between Arabs and Jews, which had been ongoing, the United States tended to support Israel. And so over this division, this is why Robert Kennedy was killed. So he's dead. The Democrats can't find another candidate that the young people in the country really buy into. And who is going to be the Republican candidate that's going to promise to kind of turn back the clock past all those troubles of the 1960s, back to the good old days, when the country was moral and decent and secure in the 50s? It'll be the vice president of the 50s, Nixon. Richard Nixon is going to win the presidency. Good, that's recording. All right, so Nixon takes over as president. When Nixon takes over as president, he is going to begin negotiating to try to get a peace in Vietnam so the United States can bow out gracefully. We can say, we're turning the war over to you, the South Vietnamese. We're going to call that process Vietnamization, where we train their troops, we give their troops the weapons to fight on and defend their own freedoms, and then we're going to pull our troops out. Now, in your lifetime, have you ever seen us train the local people to defend themselves, give them tons and tons of weapons, and then step away to let them fend for themselves? Okay, so what you saw in Afghanistan, most of my generation knew that was coming because it was the same thing we did in Vietnam. Was it really ever about saving Afghanistan from the Taliban taking over? No, we knew the Taliban was going to take the place over. We just didn't know how fast. Because that's what happened in Vietnam. We're going to turn it over to the South Vietnamese so they can fight on. We can bow out without losing and say we've done our part, we've set them up for success, and we'll step away. And we'll pray and hope for the best, but we know it's probably not going to work out. Now, what happened in your lifetime in Afghanistan, where everything crumpled before we even were fully pulled out of there? No, that doesn't happen over here, and nobody saw that coming this time around. It was amazing just how quick that collapsed. But that's what we're doing back in Vietnam back then. We're training their troops, giving them weapons. We're hoping they can fight on, but we've got to get the North Vietnamese to sit down and negotiate so that the fighting can ease so we can pull our troops out. We've got to make some kind of a peace. Problem is, when we start asking for peace, what do they know? They know that we're about to leave and they've won. So do they want to give us concessions and give in to us? No. They feel like they're winning. Why would they sit down and talk? We've got to force them to talk. So two things. One, Nixon, who's promised to de-escalate the war, escalates the war. He starts bombing Cambodia and Laos, the countries next door where the Ho Chi Minh Trail is. He invades those countries temporarily. He starts bombing North Vietnam, and he doesn't exactly tell the American public when he does it. So he looks like he's lying to us. He's doing this behind our back. He promises peace, and he escalates the war. But his reason for doing that, he's trying to force them to come to the table and talk. But who is supplying these people and encouraging these people? The North. Who's encouraging them, helping them? China and Russia. We need to get those countries to help us get their buddy under control and get them to the negotiating table. But to do that, well, it's going to be really hard with China because what's our official stance with China? They're not even a country. Taiwan's the country. That's where Nixon does something brilliant. And this is what Nixon would probably be remembered for. If Nixon hadn't screwed up his legacy with Watergate, we would probably have a mostly positive view of President Nixon at this day and age in our history. Remember, Democrats, what's the big accusation that Republicans cast against Democrats in the Cold War? Right, they're weak on communism. Although, who is it that led us into the Korean War? Democrat Harry Truman. Who led us in Vietnam? Democrat Lyndon Johnson. It ends up, the Republicans accuse the Democrats of being soft on communism. And to answer that criticism, the Democrats have to get all tough and say, no, we're not soft. Look at us. We're fighting over there. But the Republicans, they portray the image that they're tough. So when they actually get into office, people don't question whether they're tough on communism. So they can actually start making peaceful overtures. It's that weird sort of political contradiction here. The Republicans who talk tough on communism are the ones who have the ability to go and reach out with the olive branch, which is what Nixon does. Nixon opens us up to China. He starts befriending them. He goes to China. He traumatizes this little girl. I mean, look at his face. That's the face you meet a little girl with. The girl's probably about my age, and I'm pretty sure there's a 53-year-old woman in China who wakes up with nightmares every night because of meeting that weird man. But Nixon went to China. And the leader of China, this guy, Deng Xiaopeng, he comes to America. Now, for a second, we got to put a pin in Nixon, and we got to talk about what Deng Xiaopeng is doing, because it's a big deal. See, China, and did we talk about the Great Leap Forward? Okay, we need to talk about the Great Leap Forward. Oh, and let me make sure. I think I have it back here somewhere. So many slides. There it is. Okay. So, this is what's been going on in China since they became communist. I give China this much. They really tried communism. Russia never fully goes all in on communism. I mean, you end up with Stalin, and he's just a brutal dictator ruling by fear. China actually tries to set up a real, true communist country. It goes about like you'd expect. Millions die because communism doesn't work. But they tried. Under Mao, they had a 5-year plan. The communists were always coming up with 5-year plans. Notice their 5-year plan lasted from 1959 to 1961. Well, how many years is that? 3 years.
Oh, I was reading the top one.
Okay. 3 years is how long their 5-year plan lasted. And it's not that their math is bad. It's just that's how bad their plan was, that they had to cut it short. The plan was called the Great Leap Forward. And the idea was they're going to reorganize their whole society as a communist society. What that means is in the countryside, on the farms, they're going to create communes where the farmers all work together to grow the crops that are needed to supply the industrial workers in the cities. And so it's no longer a bunch of little private farms do your own thing. You are in a commune. You are controlled by the government. And the idea is to maximize production so that everyone works together and they produce what is needed for the good of the country. Other people in the cities, they are organized into communes with different factories and industries to produce the things the country needs to get ahead. And so they have communes where they work, and there are men who are put in charge of these communes. They're the head of the commune, and the government expects what out of them? Total loyalty, and on their farm, what do they expect? Lots of produce. On their factory, what do they expect? Lots of products. They expect success. So what ends up happening is these guys who are in charge of the communes, because they're always in fear that they will displease the government and be shipped off somewhere, they are doing everything they can to make it look like they're a success. So if they can, they will use whatever means to force their workers to produce. So sometimes they will terrorize their workers. Sometimes they will be really kind to their workers. Sometimes they will bribe their workers. And a lot of times they will just fake the results. And they'll turn in information saying we produced this much and produced this much. And it's just a bunch of lies. And what ends up happening is they have shortfalls of food. And the country ends up basically creating its own famine. And millions of people are going to find themselves starving thanks to this attempt to use communism to run their country. It's just a giant failure. But give them credit. They actually acted like they believed communism was the real thing, and they actually tried it, and it actually failed. And they actually learned from it. Took them a while because Mao is committed. He's not going to totally throw communism in the trash, but we're going to see by the 70s Deng Xiaopeng make some changes. Now, Mao does one other thing too. Mao, after that 5-year plan failed, and they have to give up the idea of pure communism, they're going to have something more practical. But they come up with what's called the Cultural Revolution. Now, the idea is, in the Cultural Revolution, they're going to stamp out all the last vestiges of capitalism. So anybody who is an economist who says, oh, we'd be better off under capitalism, what's going to happen to these people? They're going to disappear. They'll be sent off to re-education camps where they are trained to believe the communist line, or they just die. If you're a teacher and you question the success of the communist government or the leadership of the communist government, what happens to you? You go off to one of these camps where you are re-educated or you disappear entirely. And they do that to their most intelligent people. Anybody who defies the party's authority or the success of communism under Mao, they're going to disappear. And that means, what do you need if you have a company or a country or whatever, and you have people in that company or country and they say, hey, that plan doesn't work. Shouldn't we try this? Is that a bad thing? No, that's a good thing. People who are loyal, who are questioning what we're doing, sometimes helps you come up with better plans. What has China just done? They've eliminated anyone who questions what's going on. So is this going to make the country better? No. But it wasn't just about stomping out capitalists. It was actually also about one more thing. And this is the root of everything. Mao wants himself and China to be the supreme communist country. Russia was the competition. And a lot of the communists in China had been trained in Russia, learned and educated in Russia. And a lot of them wanted to look to Russia for help or follow Russia's patterns. And Mao wanted to clean house. So in addition to getting rid of anybody with capitalist tendencies, he was also killing off or eliminating anybody who sided with Russia. He's dividing Russia and China further and further apart and getting a Chinese communist government that is opposed to Russia. So that's what's been going on while we've been doing all the stuff we've been doing. So that by the time we get up here to Deng Xiaopeng, Mao finally passes away. And Deng Xiaopeng becomes the head of the Communist Party in China. And what Deng Xiaopeng does, he does not get rid of communism as a party or as an authoritarian government. He's not going to be handing out freedoms in democratic elections. But what he is going to do is he's going to say, you know what? The communist economy did not work. And what we need to do here in China is we need to change our economic model. We need to open up to the world. Instead of trying to do it all ourselves, we need to trade with the world. We need to connect with the world. And what part of the world is making money and successful? Yeah, the Western world, the capitalist world. Forget Russia. They're no good. Their economy was terrible. We want to connect with the capitalist world. And so he's opening up China. He wants, at the same time that Nixon's going to come to China looking for a buddy, they're looking for buddies. They want trade partners. And Deng Xiaopeng, after he and Nixon start connecting, he's going to come to America. He's going to travel America. He's going to come to Texas and get a cowboy hat and go to a rodeo and make a lot of business partnerships with rich Texans and oil companies down here. He's going to be encouraging capitalists to come invest in China. And when they start opening up to the world for trade, that does have the effect of starting to give a little bit more freedom to the Chinese people, a little bit more opportunity to travel, a little bit more openness to the rest of the world. Now, it doesn't mean that the communist government still isn't fairly totalitarian, but it does mean that their opportunities and their freedoms start to increase a little bit. And that's the road that Deng Xiaopeng puts China on. And if you look at China today, overall, China is an extremely successful country economically. Doesn't mean it doesn't have its faults. Doesn't mean it still doesn't have some problems. And it doesn't mean that their government has given up on being the one government controlling the country. They don't have the freedoms we have. But look at how many Chinese students we've had over here in America, in our school, over the last decade. China's much more open than it used to be. Yes? So, Deng Xiaopeng is opening China to the world. Nixon, going back to Nixon here, he's opening America to China. Nixon goes so far as to say, hey, Taiwan, you're not China anymore. China, the communists, they're going to get to have their seat in the UN now. The U.S. approves that. We will deal with Red China. They are now a country. Now, we still are going to be friendly with and protect Taiwan, and we still do. But we're going to start opening up to China. Now, when we start getting kind of buddy-buddy with China, who in the world gets nervous about that? Russia. Russia doesn't... where'd it go? That's not it either. There it is. Russia gets nervous. Russia doesn't want the U.S. and China to team up on them because they and China aren't getting along. So Russia now starts to try to buddy up to us. And Nixon is not only able to ease tensions with China, he's able to ease tensions with Russia. And we get, for the first time ever, a nuclear arms limitation treaty. The SALT Treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, was the first limits we ever put on making nuclear weapons. Now, here's the chart. We're both going to have over 1,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles. We're both going to have over 5,700 nuclear warheads, which means both of our countries could destroy the world about 7 or 8 times over, all by ourselves. So is this an extremely limited sort of nuclear treaty? No, but it's a big first step. It's the first time we've put a limit on nuclear weapons. So the United States and Russia are starting to ease tensions. And they call this period détente. It's a French word for kind of easing tensions and being peaceful and diplomatic. The United States and our communist opponents are easing tensions. And by easing tensions with Russia and China, we're able to get their guys to go to their North Vietnamese buddies and help put pressure on these guys to sit down at a table and make an agreement with us, which is what we're going to do. The agreement is going to be, we're going to ease military aggression, ease the fighting in Vietnam, so that the United States can pull our troops out of there. We're going to, in the meantime, train South Vietnam to defend themselves. And the goal is set that North Vietnam and South Vietnam are going to, in the future, have talks, make an agreement, and hold elections to unite the whole country. So, the U.S. is going to be able to start pulling out of Vietnam. And by 1973, we had pulled all of our troops out of Vietnam. Now, another positive thing, with all that going on, space. The U.S. has beaten Russia to the moon. Russia is basically given up on their dream of going to the moon by the 1970s because their economy stinks, and they can't really afford to keep up with us in space. Instead, they've kind of switched to building space stations. And the Russian Mir space station will be a record-setting space station, which is going to be up there in space for a couple of decades. It will be the longest space station in space until the International Space Station, I guess, will finally eventually pass its record. But they create a space station, and they start trying to do things in orbit rather than go to the moon. In the U.S., we're working on our own space station, Skylab. And we agree, for the first time ever, to have a joint space mission. The Apollo-Soyuz mission. You see there's an American Apollo spacecraft like we went to the moon. There's a Russian Soyuz spacecraft like they still use to go to the International Space Station to this day. It was a pretty good vehicle. It's stood the test of time. And you notice there's an extra little component built in between. Our two spacecrafts have a little dock that we built together. Over in Russia, they built their half of it. Over in America, we built our half of it. We sent astronauts and cosmonauts into space, and they floated along, and those locks joined, and our astronaut and cosmonaut floated into the airlock and shook hands in space. It was the first time that we had ever had a joint space mission between countries. Between a communist nation and a capitalist nation, we're easing tensions in space. Things are looking pretty positive.